Hello my friends, my name is Luisa and this is the Lulu Blue Studio. Today we are going to paint together a Quince for the 20-day flower creation journey. We are on day 8 and I'm so excited to paint this flower, which is part of the rose family. It's in round shape and with very tiny little leaves. So to start painting this Quince, we are going to use my beloved filbert brush. We use a mixture that I already have on my palette of orange and red. This is Winston Orange and Scarlet Lake. And I add a little bit of yellow ochre to this mixture, and using this brush, in particular the belly and the side of the brush, I press onto the paper the brush and I start to create the petals of these little flowers called Quince. I created these petals changing the color values that I have on my brush. Therefore, I remove into my cup of water the pigment and I keep pressing and using the whole belly and the side of my brush to create these petals. As you can see, I am pressing and dragging onto the paper this brush and I twist it to create a round shape. I'm adding a little bit of contrast, a concentrated red and a concentrated yellow ochre onto the external part of the petals, and I'm defining the shape of this Quince flower. I do the same for the second flower, so I start to create these petals by touching the paper with the belly of my brush and then creating these petals by dragging the brush towards the center. Quince flowers are pretty small in size and they are of round shape with many petals, so this is what we are going to try to achieve. We are going to leave a white center for the moment because in a second step we are going to add the yellow center. I keep creating the third flower by using the belly and the side of my brush and dragging the pigment from the external part of the petal to the inner part of the flower. I change the color value and the color, that means the hue in general, of all of these petals by removing part of the pigment in my cup of water or by taking new pigments onto my brush and laying these pigments onto paper. So the Quince flowers are hanging on branches, so at the moment it looks like these flowers are just flowing onto the paper, but I will add in a second moment these branches, and therefore when I'm creating these flowers I'm keeping an eye and thinking where I wanted to create them, because I'm going to have in a second step a branch that is going to connect some of these flowers. I keep defining the shapes of these petals and I add more concentrated pigments into the outer petals that I've created and into the inner petals of these flowers. Since the first layer of paint onto the paper is still wet, when I add these more concentrated brush strokes, the paint is going to blend with the layer underneath. And I follow the same process to start to create a few buds, because I noticed from the reference picture that beside flourishing flowers, there are also a few buds of quinces that are not completely open. So that's what I'm doing, and the shape of this filbert brush is perfect to just touch with the side and the belly of the brush, the paper, to create a little bud of Quince. In the lower part of the paper, I noticed that there is some white space, and I started to create a new flower following the reference picture that I have in front of me. I keep changing the color value to create additional petals, and I change the hue of the petals to create more movements onto the composition. I keep looking at the reference picture to understand where to place new flowers and new buds. But I encourage you to look at your page and just even add flowers wherever you feel like, and to create your own composition out of this reference picture I'm looking at and what I am creating on my paper. You can add some contrast by touching the center of your flowers with darker colors. And that's what I've done up until now with these Quince buds and Quince flowers. Now I'm taking my round brush in size 12 and I'm mixing a little bit of brown, this is burnt umber, and a little bit of red to start to create these branches. These flowers are hanging and I am looking at the reference picture, and with the very tip of my brush I started to create very fine lines that resemble these branches. As you can see, I am not creating a straight line and I'm not putting a lot of pressure onto my brush because I want these branches to be created out of several lines. Therefore, I'm going to use also the white of my paper to give the impression that these branches are in very loose style. I keep connecting through these branches the main flowers, but also the buds. And I look at the reference picture to understand how these branches are ending and how to optimize this composition. I keep changing the color value and the hue of the brown I'm using. I'm mixing a little bit of burnt umber, but sometimes I add, for example, a little bit of yellow ochre. And I keep creating these branches and I keep connecting the main flowers to the buds. Where I notice that there are some white areas, I've decided to add a few branches where there are no flowers hanging from. In fact, I noticed that also on the reference picture that I am looking at, there are a few branches where there are going to be a few leaves, but there are no buds or no flowers that are hanging from. So this is what I am doing. I'm adding a little bit of branches where there are some white spots, some white areas that I want to fill with some color. I encourage you to do the same, to look at your picture and to maybe add some more flowers compared to what I have painted, or to add a little bit more branches to create a whole composition that is covering the whole page that you have at your disposal. To start to create these small leaves, I decided to use my mop brush. As you probably know by now, I love to create small leaves with a mop brush because I have the feeling these leaves are going to be in very loose style and they are going to fit perfectly the composition that I've already created. In order to create these leaves, I am just touching with the tip of this mop brush the page, and I am then pressing the belly of this mop brush towards the bottom. I look at the reference picture and I notice that these leaves are just very small in size and hanging left and right these branches. So this is what I'm doing. But to be honest, I started to have quite a lot of fun creating these leaves, and therefore I will add a little bit more leaves compared to the reference picture. Sometimes I just use a little bit of sap green to create these leaves. Sometimes I mix the sap green with a little bit of green earth or with other colors that I already have on the color palette, like brown, the burnt umber that I've used for the branches. And in this way, I started to create different types of colors, different hues, that all together, by the end of the composition, are going to fit perfectly and in a very homogeneous way all over all of this composition. Have fun while creating these small leaves. These are just very tiny pieces that complete this painting, but they are an excellent exercise to learn how to use just a very small pressure onto your brush to create very small details that in this case in fact are leaves. You can use also a round brush in order to create these leaves. I'm just using a mop brush because there is less precision using this sort of brush, and I really love the effect that comes out with creating these leaves. I take now a little bit of phthalo turquoise, so this blue, and I mix it with the green to start to create some contrast. I'm creating contrast by adding small leaves in a very dark color. Some of these leaves are going to blend with the green that is already on the paper because it's still wet, through the wet on wet technique. And some of the leaves are instead standing by their own and they are gonna really pop by the end of this composition. In this moment, I'm having quite a lot of fun creating these leaves, so I'm actually creating many more leaves compared to the reference picture. I actually don't mind because I like the outcome of this composition overall, but you can stop before I do if you wanted to just create less leaves and to have something that is more similar to the reference picture. But a tip that I want to give you is remember to add some contrasting strokes when you are creating your compositions. So these can be placed at the end or while you are in the middle of your painting. Just remember to add some strokes that are darker in color because these will allow your painting to pop. With a brush in size 6, this is a round brush, I take a little bit of yellow ochre and yellow lemon dip and I start to touch with the very tip of my brush the center of these flowers. When we started painting these flowers, in fact, we left the center white in order to add these yellow strokes at the end. So this is what I'm doing and I really like the result so far. At this point, I decided to take my mop brush and to use a little bit of Scarlet Lake with maybe a mixture of a little bit of orange and a little bit of magenta to create a few strokes around the petals of the flowers. In this way, I'm using just the tip of my brush and creating some circular motions in order to create a few strokes that define better the petals. You can stop at this point, you don't have necessarily to add these strokes in the way I am doing. I just want to give you an option that you can experiment with. So feel free to add these strokes if you like to create more definitions onto your flowers. If you like instead to have the flowers as they are with beautiful wet in wet bleedings and blendings of colors, just leave this step away and just enjoy the composition as you have created it. I feel the mop brush is the perfect brush to create these strokes because it's not super precise, let's say, in the strokes that you can obtain, and I really like this effect. I have the feeling it's a very loose effect that I cannot obtain with, for example, a round brush. I am looking at this composition and we have reached the end of this tutorial, of this Quince tutorial. I really hope you enjoyed and learned something from it. I hope to see you on day 9.